Hello. Boy, am I excited to share with you all my new build, Astral CoX Stormweaver. This past week, I've extensively tested all variations of Ice Nova, from Cast on Crit, Cast on Freeze, Archmage, Sacred Flame, you name it, I've tested it. I think I finally landed on a well-rounded version that balances elite mapping clear speed while also deleting T4 Pinnacle bosses. Essentially, the whole build boils down to using Ice Nova with the Astral Projection support gem as our main clearing ability and trigger for Cast on Crit or Cast on Freeze or both. In this short guide, I'll go over the main build mechanics and then I'll talk you through the primary gearing considerations. I've included two different build paths for you to choose from and customize accordingly, one with a focus and the other a Sceptre, and we'll go over both setups in detail later. Patch 0.2 brought two specific changes that have enabled Ice Nova as a primary damaging ability. Number 1. Astral Projection. Normally you can only cast Ice Nova around yourself or on a Frostbolt projectile. This gem lets you cast Ice Nova anywhere, essentially turning it into a point-and-click AoE spell. In 0.2, they significantly reduced the AoE penalty on Astral Projection, so it's no longer as punishing to equip. This 35% less became 25% less, which may not seem significant at first, but when it says area of effect, what it actually means is radius of spells. So when you convert all of that to an actual AoE number, it translates to a 33% increase in AoE, which is a massive buff. And number 2, GGG also buffed Ice Nova itself. They made the freeze build up scale with levels, so mine for example has plus 188% now versus 50% before. More importantly, before the patch, the extra freeze buildup only applied when you comboed it with Frostbolt, not by itself. Now, after the patch, you get that almost 200% freeze buildup anytime you cast Ice Nova, no combos needed. And oh, by the way, they also buffed the actual gem scaling while most other spells got completely nuked. Now to be fair, despite those buffs, Ice Nova is still a relatively weak spell from a raw numbers perspective. We do require lots of gem levels and crit scaling to make the build work fluidly from a damage perspective, as well as AoE to offset Astral Projection penalty. And that's really one of the main downsides of this build, which is that there's a very high minimum gearing requirement just to function. We're using Malagaro's Virtuosity and 4 different unique jewels, so for SSF Hardcore this build is probably completely inaccessible. And you also need a high quality wand and focus to have enough crit on Stormweaver, and you want energy shield and mana gear so that cost can really add up here, even for this off meta build. The other sort of glaring downside is that we are permanently bottlenecked by mana. Without mana remnants and triple mana cost reduction passives, the build does not work. In fact, every single important build decision, such as which weapons to equip, which support gems to use, which affixes on gear to look for, everything is based on mana cost considerations. So the hurdles here are quite high, you have been warned, but if you can somehow surpass them, then this Astral Ice Nova build is incredibly fun. To be honest, I had some trouble describing exactly what I like so much about this build. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like POE2 is really missing that sort of instant click AoE caster archetype. Like all the meta caster builds right now, Arc Spark, Frostbolt, Essence Drain, Ember COI, you get the point. They're all projectiles and dots. For the first time in POE2, it feels like I'm playing a true ranged spellcaster again, with point and click, instant AoE explosions. For me, that's really the best part of this build, is that it feels like I'm playing a Sorceress, or caster, or mage, or whatever you want to call it. It just feels right. It's fluid, it's fast, it's don't tell GGG, but it's fun. There's many different ways to pair Ice Nova with Cast on Crit and Cast on Freeze, but I want you to consider a conceptual axis. On one end of the spectrum, we turn off all the meta energy skills and let Ice Nova do 100% of the damage, maybe even running Archmage. Surprisingly, for mapping only, this was arguably the best setup. However, bossing was nearly unplayable. On the other end, we don't rely on Ice Nova damage at all and instead use it purely as a trigger for meta energy skills, proccing Cast on Crit and Cast on Freeze frequently. I tested basically every setup on this imaginary axis, and personally, I recommend aiming for a balanced middle ground. Somewhere in the middle, there's a sweet spot where Ice Nova still deals decent damage on its own, enough to one-shot normal and magic mobs, while Cast on Freeze Cold Snap handles rare monsters since they get instantly frozen. This gives you a very smooth mapping experience where you're clearing half your screen instantly with a single click. Cast on Crit Comet is overkill for maps, and it drains way too much mana, so we will reserve it for bossing. Ice Nova supports, obviously you want Astral Projection, then you want any 2 damage and crit gems. I always like Cold Exposure on Stormweaver, and Ambush is quite strong for crit. If your damage isn't high enough to one-shot all mobs, then you should strongly consider Pinpoint Critical instead of Ambush. For the 4th slot, you must reserve this for increased AoE, Magnified Effect is the obvious choice, but Spell Echo is viable as well, arguably even better if your damage is low. Lastly, I use Frost Nexus, which creates chilled ground everywhere so that your Ice Nova gains 20% more damage from its quality effects. This isn't mandatory and also destroys your FPS because it creates chilled ground for every single monster, but it's still a 20% more damage multiplier at the end of the day, so I use it. Feel free to replace that with anything else, just always check your mana cost. Gems like Inspiration, Arcane Tempo, Energy Barrier, Zenith, all fine options. For Cast on Freeze Cold Snap, we use both Impetus and Energy Retention to ensure that it casts as often as possible while mapping. We want this to proc on every single rare mob. Then we add Deliberation and Leverage because they have no mana penalties, but any other damage gems are honestly fine here. For Pinnacle bosses, we are using the tried and true Cast on Crit Comet setup with Frostwall as main trigger. If you've seen any of my prior videos, or you've seen any Cold Sorceress builds this league, you're probably already familiar with the setup. Frostwall always uses Spell Cascade to surround the boss and Ingenuity for CDR. Then you want 3 damage gems. Personally, I use Considered Casting, Execute, and Pinpoint Critical. Any 3 damage gems works here, just aim for high crit or you won't generate energy for Cast on Crit. Inside Cast on Crit, we want level 21 Comet paired with Inspiration to reduce mana cost since we are using level 35 Comet with Prism of Belief. Then we want any 3 pure damage gems that do not add mana cost. This is very important. Also, we do not need more energy gain for Cast on Crit. I repeat, we do not need more energy gain. Our bottleneck is already mana, and our boss damage is directly tied to our mana regeneration, so we do not need to generate more comets. We just want our comets to deal more damage without adding more mana cost. So we're using Concentrated Effect, Elemental Focus, and Fluke, which says it increases by 20%, but it doesn't actually increase the mana cost. Before we go over the items, here are the 3 thresholds or breakpoints that you should aim for. First is your Ice Nova critical hit chance. Obviously the higher the better here, but the key thing is that the first hit of Ice Nova must always crit. So you can achieve this by getting 50% crit on Ice Nova and then using Ambush for guaranteed crits against full life enemies, or you can get 60% crit here and then add Pinpoint Critical, which will raise this up to 100% for our guaranteed crit. And then the second breakpoint is everything mana related. No real hard and fast rules here, just make sure that your individual spell costs are reasonable relative to your mana pool and your mana regeneration. Now just as an example, my Ice Nova costs less than 400 mana, Cold Snap like 200, Frostwall 300, and my Comet's around 500, and that's relative to my 2100 mana pool and 430 mana regeneration. This you might just have to test manually to get a feel of what values you're comfortable playing with. Level 35 Comet, for example, has 1268 base mana cost, so I hope you guys get the importance here. And then lastly, you just got to get 40 additional spirit from either your amulet or your chest. With 140 total, you can use Cast on Freeze with Arctic Armor and Mana Remnants for mapping, and then for bossing, you just turn off Cast on Freeze, turn off Arctic Armor, and turn on Cast on Critical. And it should be relatively easy to switch back and forth between the 2 setups. If you don't want to deal with turning on and off all these spells all the time for bossing, or you're just someone who, if you think back to the access from earlier, you just like playing with the meta energy spells and you don't care too much about Ice Nova damage, then one totally viable option is to use the Sacred Flame Shrine Sceptre. For me, the main benefit of using Sacred Flame was actually the build flexibility that it provided. The fire res basically frees up 1 affix line on your gear, and the 110 spirit means that you can mix and match your spells however you want. Plus, it makes mana costs a bit more manageable since you're not getting the +2 gem levels like with the focus, meaning that you have a little bit more flexibility with your gems. For example, you can use ones that include mana cost. And lastly, the damage itself isn't terrible. You get 40 to 60% gain as extra, and it comes with fire exposure since our Ice Nova always applies cold exposure on crit, so it's not that inefficient. Now, of course, all that comes with the major downside of losing all the offense stats from the focus, which can add up to more than 100% crit chance, 2 gem levels, and 30% cast speed, and that's just the suffixes. And that's not even counting the added energy shield, mana, and spell or cold damage that you get from the prefixes, plus an additional rune slot. So it's basically you're trading away your max ceiling damage potential for a lot of build flexibility. Either are totally viable routes, and I'll leave the choice up to you. Okay, let's quickly go over the items and discuss slot efficiency. The vast majority of our damage scaling comes from the wand, followed by the focus or scepter slot. So clearly most of your currency investment should be going towards getting a nice wand with high crit chance, +5 cold spells, and ideally cast speed. Gain % damage is the best prefix, better than additive cold or spell damage, but focus on the suffixes first. For focus, same thing. You want high crit chance, +2 spell levels, and cast speed. Unlike attack-based builds, the jewelry slots are really not that important in the sense that they don't provide as much damage scaling. On our amulet, we want +3 spells and spirit if it's not on our chest already, as well as cast speed. The rest is all bonus, but mana and energy shield are probably the best overall modifiers. For rings, we truly only care about mana regeneration, and cast speed. This is a good slot for rarity and attributes or other resistances that might fill the gaps in your build. Do not overspend on your rings because they don't add that much battle power for this specific build. As for defenses, we are using Chaos Inoculation and Eternal Youth, so high energy shield, chest, and helmet are absolutely crucial. Make sure that you get a good Vile Robe or Flowing Raiment for this build. For boots, obviously you want 35% move speed, and ideally you want mana on here as well. For belts, triple res and instant recovery are great. Many other options here are fine, but focus on the resistances. Also, just go out right now and spend 30 exalts on a good mana flask. Just go do it right now. We're going to be permanently spamming this thing every 2 seconds, and it costs less than 1 div for a near perfect one, so just go buy one. And lastly, as mentioned, we are using Maligra's Virtuosity Gloves with a Xantippe Soul Core to lower the dex requirement. In my opinion, the guaranteed 300% crit damage here is just way too valuable to skip, especially when you consider that you need the dex for support gems anyway. I don't even care about the dead attack speed line here because it just saves us so many points on the passive tree and allows us to use pinpoint critical so effectively that I can't imagine swapping these out, but if someone has a better crit setup, I'd love to see it. For the Ascendancy passives, we're taking Arcane Surge, Additional Exposure, and Double Shock. All of these 3 are mandatory in my opinion. And then for the last 3 points, you can either spec into more Arcane Surge or take all hits contribute to shock chance. I use the all hits shock node, and then I use Frostbomb with Overcharge and Commiserate for bosses, but you can replace all that with Ball Lightning or Orb of Storms, and then just take more Arcane Surge if you want. Unfortunately, they did nerf this node pretty badly, so it's kind of sad to click, but if you have a very large mana pool, then it can be viable. And stepping back, obviously this is a Stormweaver example, but I think other Ascendancies like Lich in particular could run this build very well if you can manipulate the mana costs. Let's quickly go over the jewel slots before we go through the pathing. For Prism of Belief, I use +3 Comet to scale the damage higher. It increased the mana cost a lot, but it's worth taking as long as you can sustain that increased mana cost. And then from Nothing, I use Eldritch Battery. I like this one better than the one by Mind Over Matter, just for this particular build. Mainly because you actually do end up saving a lot of points, and it only costs 1 Divine, so the value is definitely quite high. For Controlled Metamorphosis, we're using the one smack dab in the middle here with a very small ring. It's relatively high value because you get 4 decent passive nodes that increase your exposure effect, you get gain and extra damage, crit chance, as well as cast speed, and then area of effect. So pretty good Controlled Metamorphosis. And then for Megalomaniac, basically you just want either Mental Toughness or Deep Trance, one or the other. And then whichever one you don't have, you want to anoint on your amulet. Any other additional line beyond that would just be bonus. As long as you get Deep Trance or Mental Toughness, you should be happy. And then for your Sapphires, obviously the perfect one would include double crit chance and then area of effect and I don't know, maybe energy shield, but anything like that or percent additive damage or percent mana on kill or even better energy skill gain, anything like that should be decent. As for the tree itself, not much new here in terms of the pathing. The Sorceress tree sucks, so we make our way right over to the Monk starting tree, where we can get all these juicy nodes like crit, attributes, move speed, energy shield, etc. All good stuff. Then we can move over here, pick up Conservative Casting for that juicy 16% mana cost reduction. Then we move over to Eternal Youth and Dynamism for energy gain and a little bit of additive damage. After that, we path northwards, picking up Careful Assassin, which gives us a lot of crit, and then we get Chaos Inoculation and Abasement. This new stun threshold passive right here is actually very high value because it gives us 20% stun recovery, so I would recommend spending these 3 points. Then we move past our Eldritch Battery from Nothing, we get these juicy energy shield nodes, before we make our way over to the Cold Damage Wheel, and finally we make our way all the way to the top left of the tree. We walk through the Storm Charge, all natural, Breaking Point, this triangle here, make our way over to get more AoE, as well as Calibration, which is one of the best energy shield mana nodes. And then we close out with the 2 jewel slots here, one over here on the left side, and one all the way on the right side over here. And that's the whole tree. Should be pretty obvious from the pathing, like what our highest priorities are. We mentioned this earlier, but the #1 priority is all 3 mana cost reduction passives. Conservative Casting, deep trance, mental toughness. Yes, you really need all three. Second is crit nodes. We basically take every crit chance node available on the top and right side of the tree as we path by. Number 3, AoE. We need to offset the astral projection penalty, and also larger Ice Nova just means more map coverage. So more mobs killed, faster mapping, etc. That's why we need as much AoE as possible. Also, it has the side benefit of helping us shatter frost walls easier, so AoE is really nice in many ways for this build. Lastly, Energy Shield. Besides the ES from our armor pieces, all of our defenses in terms of Energy Shield come from the tree, so we actually need to click a lot of the percent ES nodes. I personally aim for 6,000, but you do you. With Arctic Armor, I promise you're basically invulnerable to melee mobs, so just make sure you get your Energy Shield as high as possible to tank one-shots and projectiles. That's really it, guys. I know I didn't go into too much detail about any one specific thing. I like to keep these videos high level, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and I'll answer as many as possible. Or if you ask on Twitch or Discord, I promise you'll get a more thorough response. As always, good luck!